Welcome to ADI TV. By default, Illustrator opens up with an application frame, much like Photoshop. And what I mean by that is you can see that the whole application is actually held within a window. Now sometimes that can be frustrating if you're going and getting files and opening multiple documents. So if that's the case, then you can toggle that on and off by going Window, Application Frame. Now what I wanted to really talk about in this tutorial was opening a new document. So if I go File, New, and that's going to open a new document. And I'm confronted with this dialog box, which gives me a number of different options. Now first of all, got the name, so I'm just going to call this my first page. Okay, the profile. Originally Illustrator started out by just having essentially one profile, or everything you did in Illustrator was primarily for print. But as the applications got bigger and more uses have been found, they've actually started to customize the different documents so that it's better equipped for the relevant thing you're doing. Now as beginners, I would actually urge you just to stick with the standard print. That's a kind of a known format that everyone uses and everyone's familiar with. And as you get more advanced, then you can maybe try some of the other ones that are maybe more relevant, like video and film. But yeah, as I say, just stick with print for the time being. Now the number of artboards. Now this, you're free to change, but by default, just stick to one. This may be that you're doing multiple documents and they're all different sizes and have different types of artboards. The artboard is the kind of shape or the size of the document you're going to open. Now in this instance I'm opening one artboard and the size is set to A4. Now obviously as I've chosen print, it's given me print options. So I've got letter, legal, the kind of American standards, A4, A3, etc. So I'm just going to stick to A4, that's kind of good, and it's obviously got the measurements of A4 in there. Now you can change your unit type, so whether you want it to add up in millimeters, inches, points, centimeters, etc., pixels. I actually find that millimeters is probably the most useful thing, unless you're working with type, and then maybe points is more useful. Orientation, well, I'm going to just stick to what it is at, so it's portrait, but you can obviously flip it and go landscape. Now the bleed is I think is less important in Illustrator, because really Illustrator is about creating things, not necessarily about printing. If I was going to print stuff, I would probably put it into InDesign, which I have more control over the way it can print and the way I can save PDFs, etc. But if you need to have bleed, then you can obviously change the bleed. Now you'll notice as I press this up arrow, it changes for all the top, bottom, left and right, and that's because this padlock is selected. So if I deselect that padlock, now I'm free to change them independently. So I'm just going to change that back and go back to 0. Okay, in the advanced box, I've got my color mode. Now there again, as I've chosen print, it's defaulted to CMYK, but I could go to RGB. Now RGB you would use if your ultimate goal is to have something which is going to be used for video or web, whereas a print, you're probably better off sticking to CMYK. Now the Raster Effects, you can come and change this later, and in fact a lot of these settings you can come back and change later. But with Raster Effects, sometimes if you bring in objects or some effects are actually rasterized versions and they're not vector-based versions of the image, just because of the way the effect works. So Illustrator asks you what kind of resolution you want to process those effects at. Obviously the higher the resolution, the slower the machine will work, or the more processor intensive it is. But by default it's put 300 because that's probably the default for print. Minimum resolution for print is 300. So I would just leave that as is. The preview mode, there again I would stick to default. There again you can have a look at those later. So that's pretty much sums up this dialog box. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And there we go, we've got our document that we're free to draw and create whatever we want. Now I can get up rulers by pressing Apple R, and that enables me to bring out guides. So I can click and bring out a guide. Now press spacebar to move the hand tool to move around. Now if you want rulers, you can go to View, and the rulers is under there, Hide Rulers, Show Rulers, Apple R. Okay, well that pretty much sums up opening up a new document. So I hope that's helpful. The School of Arts and Digital Industries at the University of East London.